It shone pale as bone as I stood there alone, and I thought to myself how the moon that night cast its light on my heart's true delight, and the reef where her body was strewn.
Ah, LucasArts, you truly were a pioneer of your time. Best known for their large catalogue of Star Wars games, along with being the brains behind some of the most beloved adventure games of all time, it's hard to imagine where video games might be now if it weren't for this one studio of developers. They've given us so many memorable moments, it's hard to find a single game that hasn't in some way left its mark. But personally, I don't think the studio would have gotten as big as it did if it weren't for this one little puzzle game about death itself. Led by Tim Schafer, he intended to rejuvenate the graphic adventure genre, which had been on a bit of a decline by 1998. Whilst also providing the player with a lengthy story full of complex puzzles and charismatic characters. Needless to say, he succeeded, although I doubt even he could have predicted how beloved this game would turn out to be, with many regarding it as the last truly great game by LucasArts. So come 2014, Schafer's studio Double Fine Productions seized an opportunity by Sony and developed a remastered version of this cult classic, providing us with improved graphics, music, controls, and even a director's commentary. So let's talk about it. This is Grim Fandango Remastered. Taking place in a film noir-styled land of the dead, otherwise known as the 8th Underworld, it's here that recently departed souls aim to make their way to the land of eternal rest, aka the 9th Underworld. For those who have committed good deeds in life, they are rewarded with easier access to the 9th Underworld. However, souls who did not live a kind life are left to travel through the lands of the dead on foot, which is a journey which would take most around 4 years to complete. This is the world that our main protagonist, Manny Calavera, calls home. He is a travel agent at the Department of Death in the city of El Marrow, providing travel packages to the recently departed, all in the hopes he might one day travel to the 9th Underworld himself. However, in recent days he's become frustrated by all of his lackluster clients who can't afford any decent travel packages, so out of desperation he ends up stealing a client from his more successful co-worker Domino. Yet when he brings in Mercedes Mechi Calamara for processing, the department computers assign her to the 4-year journey even though she qualifies for the number 9, an express train that takes 4 minutes to reach the gate to the 9th Underworld. Surprised, Manny decides to do some investigation and quickly discovers that not everything is right in the afterlife. Someone has been rigging the system, robbing good people of their place in the 9th Underworld. But by the time Manny had learned of this, Mechi had already left, beginning her 4-year journey to the 9th Underworld on foot. Realizing that he's not powerful enough to stop this corruption, Manny decides there's only one thing he can do. So with the help of his driver and speed demon Glottis, he goes out into the world to save Mechi and amend this mistake. It would be a long journey that would take Manny far across the 8th Underworld, from which he would grow from a simple travel agent into a successful businessman and so much more. You'll see firsthand how he and his companions grow as the years pass them by, where even the most random acts of kindness can have profound effects years later. This is a narrative that isn't afraid to delve into what truly makes us human, yet even at its darkest, it still manages to retain its charm.
Did you kill much when you were alive?
Very little.
Never killed anybody?
I have to confess, I never killed anybody.
Not even a teensy bit of killing?
Maybe I just wasn't trying hard enough.
Like any adventure game, the quality of its writing can often make or break the narrative and its puzzles, so I'm happy to say that the script for Grim Fandango is simply stellar. Not an ounce of dialogue is wasted. Every inch of this world is drenched in detail, and if the dialogue isn't trying to make you laugh, then it's providing you with clues to solve your next puzzle. So much so that you can easily get lost in the sheer intricacies of Grim Fandango's world. It's hard to think of a single character that isn't memorable or lacking depth. That being said, if there were any downsides to be found in this game's story, it's that the villains felt a little bland. Don't get me wrong, they each have their own clear-cut motivations that propel their stories along, whilst also being amplified by LucasArts' trademark humor, but when compared to the rest of Grim Fandango's cast, they kinda fall short. Like, it's hard to forget Glottis' impeccable singing skills, but if you were to ask me for one standout moment in Domino's story, the only thing that comes to mind is how it ends. Still, despite this one noticeable issue, the story of Grim Fandango is without question a classic. It's a narrative that raises questions about our own actions in life and how anyone has the capacity to change for the better, whilst also reminding you not to forget about those important to you. Of course, amidst all this soul searching, you're also going to have to contend with some finely crafted puzzles, so bust out your notebooks because it's time to start taking notes.
The very best is good enough for me.
And who would you say that would be, Calavera? Who would you say is the best lawyer you know in all the land of the dead?
You are, Nick.
That's right, and that's why Maximino retains me on an exclusive basis. So sorry, but I don't do odd jobs.
Like all classic adventure games, Grim Fandango tasks the player with solving an array of complex puzzles, each with varying levels of difficulty. Of course, depending on how well astute you are, playtime can vary. With no hint system and clues provided subtly via the dialogue, simply finding a path forward can potentially take hours. But if you're familiar with this genre of gaming, then gradually you'll begin to piece things together. Whether by conversing with characters, examining your environment, or collecting items, the world of Grim Fandango is full of possibilities, and considering the sheer scale of some of the in-game areas, you will likely spend a lot of time experimenting, testing different solutions, exploring dialogue trees and character dynamics until you end up on the right path. Sometimes a puzzle will require you to think logically, while others will force you to embrace the mindset of an undead skeleton. And sometimes you just gotta remember what you have in your inventory. Very rarely will you be given a linear path to follow. More often, the game will provide you with a large location full of various pathways and characters for you to interact with. From there, you'll have to carefully piece together the right steps to move the plot forward, which can be both fun and challenging at times.
It's a buff doll. I can see why they don't give these chisels to the new guys.
Of course, since this was the first 3D rendered adventure game by LucasArts, it gave the developers free rein to experiment with this new visual style, resulting in some interesting changes to many genre staples. For example, rather than having the game or player character inform you of any objects or persons of interest whenever the cursor passes over them, instead Manny will turn his head towards anything or anyone he can interact with, making the exploration feel more natural and player focused. Although this mechanic can cause some confusion if there are multiple items in a close proximity that you can interact with. Thankfully, Manny will naturally shift his gaze between the options presented to him, so all you gotta do is just wait a moment and he'll eventually focus on what you really want. Still, this being a game from 1998, I was expecting there to be some clunkiness with the game's design. So imagine my surprise when the remaster included some quality of life improvements, most notably of which was the controls, which have been updated for modern consoles. Now, rather than Manny moving around like he's a tank, you can effectively direct him with full analog control, which for a 3D adventure game allows for a more streamlined experience. No more unnecessary bumping while simply trying to walk around. Of course, if you want a more retro experience, you can change it so that Manny controls as he originally did on PC. Although I won't lie, it does get quite irritating after a while. Safe to say, this is a fine addition to the gameplay. However, one area of the gameplay I did wish they touched upon was the in-game inventory, which is showcased by Manny pulling out each individual item out of his coat's jacket. Granted, while this is fitting from a character standpoint, it can be rather time-consuming, especially if you're trying to find one item amidst a litany of other random objects. It's made even worse if you're tackling one of the game's timed puzzles. There's nothing more stressful than sorting through all your stuff while on a ticking clock. From a solely gameplay standpoint, the in-game inventory is pretty badly designed. Still, this is a remaster and not a remake, so I can understand them not wanting to make any major changes to the gameplay. Plus, when you consider that this is meant to be a slow-paced adventure game with no way for your character to actually die, it becomes pretty clear that the developers are expecting you to take your time, which you'll no doubt have to. That is, if you intend to solve each and every conundrum presented to you in this game. With a solid blend of dialogue and environmental-based puzzles, Grim Fandango has the advantage of providing players with a litany of challenges that'll test them in every way imaginable. With the difficulty naturally increasing as you progress, there's rarely a moment where the game feels like it's deliberately hindering your progress. The only issues to be found in its gameplay are simply a result of the era it came from. Put simply, this is a well-crafted adventure game that'll push your puzzle-solving skills to their limit. All the while, you'll be accompanied by one of the best soundtracks in gaming, only now updated for the modern age.
Oh, my boat's got a rusty anchor, rusty as she can be. Every port I go, I drop her, but she always come back to me.
With a wicked blend of South American folk music, jazz, swing, and big band sounds, Grim Fandango has in its hands a soundtrack which will perfectly draw you into this fantastical world. Composed by Peter McConnell, the original soundtrack, while brilliant, was sadly a product of its time, another victim of digital compression, meaning it couldn't be as big as the composers wanted it to be. But for the remaster, McConnell brought in the Melbourne Symphony Orchestra, as well as assorted jazz players to help breathe new life into this game's music, resulting in a soundtrack which not only remains faithful to the original game, but is able to perfectly articulate the style and character of Grim Fandango's world, effectively bringing together elements of the game's narrative without disrupting the overall experience. It is without question one of the best soundtracks you can find in a video game. It's hard not to lose yourself in these evocative tunes. It gives off the perfect vibe for a noir-style detective narrative without excluding any of the charm present in this Mexican-inspired Land of the Dead, which thanks to some top-notch sound design is able to maintain a sense of realism without disregarding its more surreal elements. There's the textbook sounds which were created by one's environment and the many possible interactions Manny might have throughout the game. Then there are sounds which defy any logic in this world, like the rumbling of a vast ocean as you travel along the sea floor, the loud roar of an engine custom built by a demon, or how about the unnerving sensation created whenever someone is being enveloped by flowers. Grim Fandango takes full advantage of its unusual setting to provide us with sounds which leave you questioning what you're feeling. One moment you'll be left in awe, and the next you could be feeling a wicked blend of confusion and dread. Of course, I can't solely credit the music and sound design for giving us such a visceral feeling. Grim Fandango's visuals definitely deserves its fair share of praise. From an artistic standpoint, LucasArts has always given us some fantastical looking games. With this one inspired by both film noir and Mexican culture, it's resulted in a visually rich experience, full of well-designed characters, artistic environments, and at times haunting locales. As the first adventure game by LucasArts to use 3D computer graphics, the developers took full advantage of this new tech to provide us with one of the most visually striking games for its time. However, for a remaster, I wouldn't consider these visuals to be a step up from the original. Unlike the soundtrack, which was re-recorded, or the controls which have been redone for current gen hardware, the visuals haven't been improved upon a great deal. For the most part, they've simply been amplified, refining the more obscure textures and making the character models a lot sharper. Aside from that, they've also added a number of more subtle visual effects, like natural shadows and lighting created by objects in the environment. But that's about as far as they've gone in the visual department, which is a little disappointing. For what's been dubbed as a remaster, they haven't really gone as far as they could have to improve the visuals. If there was a missed opportunity to be found in this re-release, it's here. Grim Fandango is what I would consider to be a bona fide classic. It's an adventure game that effectively tests the player's puzzle-solving skills, whilst also making them laugh like a hyena. From its soundtrack to its unique visual style, every inch of this game's world is drenched in detail. Not an ounce of dialogue is wasted, and there was rarely a moment where I truly felt stuck. Thanks to a gradual shift in difficulty, the puzzles never felt exceedingly difficult all the time, but a natural escalation as a result of your actions in the game. This is truly one of LucasArts' best works, and it definitely deserves all the praise it's garnered over the years. If you haven't played it before, then I definitely recommend you check it out.